and welcome once again to Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific? Brought to you by our producer, IEJ Media, and our sponsor, Bauer Group Asia. More about them in due course. Jim in New York. Jim, how is your internet today? Are we going to have any issues?
Oh, Ray, you might as well ask how many angels can dance on the head of a pin.
How many angels can dance on the head of a pin, Jim?
As many as my internet provider will allow.
Exactly. All right. Well, Jim, you are outnumbered today. Even though you and our producer Ian are both in New York, we have actually 3 on this side of the international dateline. 2 of us in the Philippines and 1 in Auckland, New Zealand. We have with us the authors of Unrequited Love, Duterte's China Embrace, which examines former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte's dramatic pivot away from the United States in 2016 and toward China during his 6-year term that wrapped up in 2022. The authors are Marites Vitug, an investigative journalist with over 40 years of experience. She's the editor-at-large for Rappler, a newspaper here in the Philippines, a Nieman Fellow from Harvard, and has authored 9 books, I believe, which, as I count, hang on a second, is exactly 9 more than Jim and I have authored together. She joins us from Manila. Camille Elemia is an award-winning multimedia journalist covering Philippine politics and Chinese influence. And if I mispronounce your last name, Camille, please forgive me. I don't think I've ever tried to pronounce it before. She's worked for the New York Times and Radio Free Asia and is a Fulbright Hubert Humphrey Fellow. And she joins us from Auckland, New Zealand. Camille, how did I do on your last name?
Well, it's Elemia, but you're
Elemia. Okay, Elemia. I'm going to get it right. All right. Well, so as I mentioned, the presidency of Rodrigo Duterte was quite extraordinary from a national and a geopolitical perspective. And of course, one of the most extraordinary parts about it was this pivot from the United States announced in 2016, almost immediately after he took office, to Beijing. And, it got a lot of attention, but we like to ask the question, why should our audience care? So why should we care about the Xi-Duterte love affair?
Yes. Can I answer that now?
Absolutely.
Well, the love affair does not just affect the Philippines. It affects geopolitics, especially in our part of the world, the South China Sea. And it also affects the value of upholding international law. As you mentioned, Ray, the Philippines won in its maritime case against China in 2016. And the victory came just 2 weeks after Duterte won. So instead of asserting Philippine sovereign rights over South China Sea, most of it anyway, he just kept it, in the back burner and described it as a piece of paper fit for the trash, for the bin. So it really affected geopolitics as well as upholding of international law. Camille, maybe you would like. I'm sorry if I ask Camille to continue.
No, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it also tested, as Marita said, the limits of international law. And I think it also offered a great case study for other smaller nations about the great power diplomacy in a contested region, such as Southeast Asia and also the South China Sea. I also like to add that as the West criticized Duterte for his drug war, which killed thousands of Filipinos, China provided a cover of sorts, even defending Duterte's drug war in the United Nations, and also definitely providing a cover and promised support, like by providing rehabilitation centers and all. And I think it also challenged, in a way, the mutual defense treaty between the U.S. and the Philippines, because for the longest time, I think Marites and I would agree on this, that for the longest time, I think the U.S. was somehow comfortable that the Philippines will just always be there to support them. But then here came Duterte, who suddenly changed the dynamics. And I think that's it.
So can I ask, when Duterte went and leaned towards Xi, was there a quid pro quo that I'll support China's views more in return for you not criticizing my domestic policy, or was there something else?
I think mainly Duterte said this from the start, that he wanted aid and investments and tourists from China. He said that he would be dependent on China forever. That he announced that in Beijing in October 2016. So it's really more economic, and China doesn't impose conditions when it gives loans to countries like the Philippines. So that's why they did not criticize his war on drugs.
And I think it's also important to note that the relationship between Beijing and Duterte has lasted for decades. It started when Duterte was still mayor of Davao City. So there's already that established relationship. And then when Duterte won the presidency, it was really easier for China to find direct contact with Duterte because they already have that. In fact, this has been a long-standing rumor in the Philippines, like among journalists and experts, that supposedly Duterte's campaign was funded by China. But until now, we still haven't had any solid, because that's something that's very difficult to prove with weak institutions in the Philippines. And in terms of campaign financing, until now, it's still a rumor that China funded this campaign. So there's that backing up.
So let's talk about that history of Rodrigo Duterte as mayor of Davao City. Talk about two things. One is the Duterte. I am in Davao City right now as we speak, and the Duterte name is everywhere. And so talk about the Dutertes in Davao City, and also, where did this antipathy toward the United States come from for Rodrigo Duterte specifically?
Yeah, maybe I'll start, and then Camille can add because she went to Davao to do the research. In our book, we say that we saw a confluence of factors and reasons for Duterte's tilt towards China. First was his friendship with Filipino-Chinese businessmen, as well as Chinese from the mainland, those who did business in Davao. He was very comfortable with them. They became his friends. They supported his programs while he was mayor of Davao. And then at the university, in college, his teacher, he said he really liked one of his professors, who happened to be the founder of the Communist Party of the Philippines, the late Jose Maria Sison. He said he learned, socialist thinking, communist thinking from Sison. And then when he was mayor, mayor and congressman, he had very negative experiences with America. Camille can explain that in detail if you like.
So there's one. Okay.
No, just for the big picture, it's personal, his growing up years. It's his education from Jose Maria Sison and his real life experiences with America.
So there's one incident in Davao, I think in the early 2000s. There's this American mayoring, and he was believed to be an FBI agent or something to that effect. And there was this bombing incident in a hotel in Davao, and mayoring was the suspect. So to cut the long story short, the U.S. Embassy reportedly promised Duterte that there will be an investigation while mayoring was still in a hospital in Davao. And then little did Duterte know that he will be whisked away and brought to the U.S. So that really bolstered the hatred of Duterte towards the U.S. So much so that Duterte, as mayor, and that was for decades, of Davao, he really stopped or prevented the conduct of military exercises in Davao, and also tried to move the whole region of, I think, parts of Mindanao to stop all these exercises from happening within their region because of that. And also, we saw that during the term during the presidency of Duterte, he kept on reiterating the colonial abuses of the U.S. So that was partly that, because his mother, Soledad, was also a staunch anti-imperialist during the early days.
So are his views reflective of the general attitude in Davao and in Mindanao in general?
I wouldn't say so, because in the Philippines, I think it's the same with the when we look at the regions. Filipinos are really more pro-US than pro-China. Primarily because we've been effectively colonized by the US, that we are even more pro-US than Americans themselves, according to a Pew Research study. So yeah, it doesn't really translate to Filipinos. Maybe a small chunk of the people, but generally it's not. It hasn't translated to them.
Yeah, if I may add also, Jim, recent surveys, annual surveys here in the Philippines show that more than 70%, sometimes 80%, want the Philippine government to assert its sovereign rights over West Philippine Sea. And the other point of the survey is that the least trusted country here is China. It's like in the negative ratings.
So then talk about this 2016 election, because clearly it was not decided based on people's attitudes toward the U.S. and China. That was part of the package deal that came in with Rodrigo Duterte. So why did Rodrigo Duterte succeed in sort of storming the gates of Manila, this outsider from down south?
I think exactly what you said, Ray. He was the first candidate from Mindanao. He packaged himself as a non-elite, not part of the elite, although he's part of the political and economic elite of Davao. And he made the voters, the Filipinos, feel that we were in danger of being a narco country, that there is this drug menace everywhere, that he was going to save the country from illicit drug use. And during the elections, a survey was done. A survey was made asking the Filipino respondents what were the urgent concerns. Suddenly, crime and drug use became one of the 5 top concerns. He was really effective in, scaring us, showing us that we were on the brink of becoming a narco state. So he wanted to save us from this menace.
Yeah, I think on top of that, I really think that Duterte appeared to be this might be debatable, but to voters, he's a very charming person. He's very authentic. So he appealed to that part of to the Filipino electorate. And also, it was the start of the use of social media. They were very effective. So it's the perfect messaging, the use of social media, his authenticity and his charm, because we came before that. The tendency of the Filipino people is to vote the exact opposite of the previous president. So far, that has been the trend. So we came from the Aquino administration, which we would say that it improved the economy, but that improvement hasn't translated to the lives of Filipinos. So they felt like that presidency lacked empathy and all that. So here comes Duterte, who suddenly speaks like them, who suddenly looks like them. And, so it added to the appeal of Duterte, and add to that the perfect messaging, as Marites talked about, and the use of social media.
All right, so Duterte's elected in 2016, and he's expecting China to increase trade and investment because he's so pro-China, because he's not going to move forward on Philippine claims in the Philippine Sea. But what actually happened, my understanding is there wasn't very much new investment from China. Is that right?
Well, we looked at the loans. We didn't track down really the foreign direct investments from China, but we looked at the loans. And when Duterte went on his first state visit to Beijing in October 2016, he came home triumphantly saying that China would give so many billions of dollars worth of loans for infrastructure. There's a long list, but at the end of his term, I think only 3 or at the most 4 projects were funded by China. So that's why that's one of the reasons we call the book Unrequited Love, because he gave China access to West Philippine Sea, had secret agreements with Xi Jinping. He said for Chinese and fishermen to fish in the Scarborough Shoal, and he gave China really like a lot of leeway in the West Philippine Sea. Yet, when it came to loans, there were only 3 or 4 projects that were funded by China.
And some of these projects, 2 of them were actually gifts, but they're very small compared to the whole, to the whole spectrum of what happened, or to the whole context of what happened during Duterte's term. One is a bridge connecting 2 cities in Manila, in Metro Manila, and the other one is a bridge connecting Manila and the Chinatown, which is also like just across the river. So those are just the 2 things. So that's based on what we've gathered and based on the interviews we've done. It's really all hype. And then, but when it comes to the actual results, it's really like small or crumbs the Philippines got.
So, from Xi's perspective, so he has this love, that he is not requiting. I don't know what unrequited means. It's a big word that you authors use. But you've got this love coming from Rodrigo Duterte. What is Xi Jinping getting out of it?
What did he get out of it?
What did he get out of the relationship?
Free reign in the South China Sea. Duterte said that it's not something he can implement. There's no world police, and that it's just a piece of paper. So that's why we saw a lot of incursions in the West Philippine Sea. However, despite Duterte's appeasement of Xi Jinping, I think during the last years of Duterte, there was water cannoning by Chinese Coast Guard of Philippine vessels. And I think this started when his defense secretary, Delfin Lorenzana, spoke up against China, as well as Duterte's foreign secretary, Teddy Boy Locsin. These 2 members of his cabinet, spoke up against China because they didn't want to, as Lorenzana said, the defense secretary said at the time, he wanted to air the sentiments of the men and women in uniform. He did not want to keep quiet. So that's why even if Duterte was all out for China, not all of his cabinet were, following him or doing his bidding.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, specifically with the South China Sea, because of that relationship between Duterte and Xi, China or Xi had somehow strategic breathing room when it comes to that disputed waters. Like, for example, we mentioned in our book that the current controversy over the sandy case, these are the sandbars near Thitu Island or Pag-asa Island, which is the only inhabited feature occupied by the Philippines in the South China Sea. There was an attempt by the Philippines to build structures there, just small structures to assert that it is because it's part of the area of Pag-asa. And then because of the good ties between China and the Philippines, then all of a sudden, there was an official who called the Navy officers to stop that operation. So now we're seeing that China has effective control over that area. I visited there, I think, over a year ago, and like just from the edges of Thitu Island, you can already see dozens of Chinese ships. So Filipinos can no longer go there. And aside from that, I think one thing that she got was that he got more allies from Southeast Asia. And I mean, there's already so many controversy about the ASEAN so-called unity and all that. And all the more, here comes the Philippines, who's a longtime strategic U.S. ally, all of a sudden, defending or shielding China from more regional opposition.
So we have none of the promises of trade investment coming through, basically, and we're giving up control of the West Philippine Sea, insulting Philippine sovereignty. 2 cabinet members speak out against it. So at the end of his term, was Duterte still popular? If he could run again, do you think he would have been reelected?
That's really the big question here. He is the most popular Philippine president to step down from office, despite the drug war, despite his pro-China policy. And I think it's because, as Camille said earlier, it's his ability to connect to the people. So foreign policy was not a basis for judging it, not even human rights. So he remains to be popular, even if he's in detention in Den Haag, in The Hague. And if he were, I don't know, no, he won't run again, but if his daughter would run for president in 2028, well, there's a good
This is his
chance.
daughter, who is currently the vice president.
Yes, Sara Duterte. She may just be the next president.
So as I mentioned, I am actually in Davao City right now, and I've had lots of conversations down here, as I do, and a lot of people here would say, "Look, Rodrigo Duterte was just being pragmatic, right? I mean, he said from the beginning we can't win a war against China. If we sort of balance in their direction, that makes sense for a small country. Why isn't that a reasonable argument?"
Well, there are two quid important or consequential effects of his pro-China policy. One is that it was during Duterte's time when the U.S. State Secretary came to Manila and made it public that the South China Sea is covered by the Mutual Defense Treaty. Because of the attitude of Duterte, he's being pro-China. So I think the U.S., gave him that assurance in public for the first time. The second is that he pressured the U.S. to give us more mRNA vaccines during the pandemic in exchange for the visiting forces agreement between the Philippines and the U.S. So maybe those two were effects of his leaning towards China. But overall, I don't know. I don't see a big picture, and we didn't see investments surge. We didn't see loans flood the Philippines from China.
And I think that's one way of looking at it. What you said, Ray, that that's one, he's just being practical. But we're based on our research, Marites and I found that there are also Southeast Asian countries that were able to stand up to China, to insist on their sovereign rights. Like, for example, Malaysia, Indonesia, and did I forget something else, Marites?
Vietnam.
Yeah, it must be like they are able to balance both the US and China. And for example, Malaysia. So the thing is, the Philippines has untapped resources in the South China Sea. And under Duterte, we couldn't really explore that because Duterte said Xi Jinping will start a war or something to that effect. But here comes Malaysia. Even though they have good ties with China, they were able to insist on their rights to explore their oil reserves in one of the disputed areas. And the government even sent a ship to protect that other private ship exploring that area. So you see, there's a way of balancing those interests without giving away your sovereignty to China.
Although there is an argument that Philippines get special attention from China, partially because so much of the West Philippine Sea is of interest to China, but also because as a treaty ally, if China can humiliate the Philippines, it shows that the U.S. is not a reliable ally. Do you buy that theory?
I'm torn. Maybe in a way, yes, because it's one easy way for China to humiliate eventually the U.S. by trying to get the Philippines. But at the end of the day, I feel like they are more in it because of the West Philippine Sea, not so much. It's just like an after effect, that the effect on the diplomatic ties between, or the alliance between the U.S. and the Philippines. Because it will be a great part of their propaganda to say that, here comes a strong U.S. ally that was won over by Beijing, who was awakened. They finally realized that U.S. is not good for them. But then, at the end of the day, they're really after the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea. That's how I view it.
But I think, Jim, China realized, and in fact, they wrote this up in Global Times. China said that, why are there dissenting voices in the Duterte cabinet? Why are they not united on the president's pro-China position. So they really, it wasn't a whole of government behind Duterte. And there were disagreements, again, from the Foreign Secretary, Defense Secretary, and we interviewed Navy officers, and they said they just tuned out when Duterte would say, I love China, we're friends with China, and they would just tune out and just continue their work, patrolling, and they never really bought into this appeasement policy of Duterte.
So, to use an American phrase, was Rodrigo Duterte up against the deep state? Were the institutions of the Philippines resistant to his foreign policy?
Very interesting finding we had in our book, because when we talked to diplomats, Department of Foreign Affairs mid-level diplomats, they were quietly resisting it, sending notes or memos to whoever was the Foreign Affairs Secretary. But it was the first two Foreign Secretaries of Duterte really just followed Duterte. But the third one, Teddy Boy Locsin, stood his ground, and he was helped by the staff of the Foreign Affairs Department who would give him advice, memos, notes, and he listened. So that was interesting with the Foreign Affairs. And again, also with the Armed Forces of the Philippines. They tried as much as possible to downplay the Navy's participation in China's PLA Navy anniversary when they sent their ships to China. For the first time, I think in Philippine military history, we sent Philippine ships, Navy ships to China to participate in PLA Navy's anniversary. There was a debate in the Navy as to whether they would just send logistic ships or send warships. But of course, the order was to send warships. But you can imagine the discussions. It wasn't just blindly following Duterte.
When I was involved with the Philippines a bit in one of my jobs, we dealt with the Philippine military, and it's as you say, the Philippine military was very pro-alliance, realizing that to stand up to China, the alliance was vital. They never said anything against their president, but it was clear they disagreed with the policy. Now, that's a dangerous situation in any country. Were you ever concerned there might be a coup or somehow overthrow the president?
No, at that time, no, because the Defense Secretary, Lorenzana, who headed military and defense establishment, spoke up to air their sentiments. And when a Chinese company wanted to develop Subic, part of Subic, where the failed shipyard of Korea, Hanjin, declared bankruptcy, it was the Navy who spoke up and really met with the president to air their opposition. And Duterte listened because he wanted to please the military. He's very comfortable with soldiers, with men in uniform. He likes to be friends with them. So he listened to them, listened to the Navy. And when there was a Chinese company that wanted to develop an island, near Taiwan, Fuga Island, again, the Navy protested, sent letter, I think a memo through Defense Secretary, and he listened again. He didn't want to displease the military. Maybe he was thinking, he had to have, he didn't want to have any protest from the military.
Yeah, at the same time, Duterte would regularly appease the military by giving them more money, more equipment, and all that. And I think one important context was, if this happened maybe a decade or two ago, then there are higher chances of a coup. But because of the experience of the Philippines and the military with these frequent coups, ousting presidents, I think now there has been, in recent years, there have been efforts to professionalize the military ranks. That's why it has been inculcated in these soldiers' minds, not to resort to those ways. That's why it has been, coupled with that context, and then Duterte trying to court them every single time and giving leeway to Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana. So I think that worked.
Well, I can certainly remember coups. I was here for 6 of them during the Cory Aquino administration. I was here stationed at Clark Air Base, and those were always very interesting times since nobody was quite sure what the Philippine military on the base was going to do. Fortunately, none of that metastasized into anything very dangerous for us, but it was certainly pretty sporty down in Manila. So let's think about, moving forward. Obviously, as we mentioned, the vice president's last name is Duterte, and she has had despite running kind of on a ticket, what they called the Uniteam, back in 2022 with President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., they have had a split, and she has become sort of her own political force in opposition to the president. Is there concern in the Philippines that she may sort of follow her father's path if she is elected and become, once again, sort of lean back toward Beijing?
Yes, that's very real. There's a real fear. In fact, her latest statement about foreign policy and China was that the Philippines shouldn't allow, this defense missile to be stationed here. The
Typhoon missile.
Typhoon missiles from the U.S. And then she never criticized China, not once. There were several incidents of ramming, all this ramming, water cannoning, all kinds of incursions. She would never make a comment, and that speaks volumes. And then plus her latest statement about not allowing that it looks like if we allow the U.S. to send its ammunition here, then that will be dangerous for the Philippines. That will be bringing us towards war. And that's the Duterte narrative. It's to scare the Filipinos that to stand up to China means this will lead us to war.
I won't. I would say that all signs from the political career of Sara Duterte in Davao to the national scene, all signs point to a return to a pro-China policy if and when she wins the presidency in 2028. However, I'm also not discounting the fact that it could change and come. I'm saying this because we kind of saw this during the Marcos administration or during the Marcos campaign, in the sense that Marcos during the campaign and when he was trying to run for president, didn't really talk so much about against China or against China's aggressions in the South China Sea. And then lo and behold, when he became president, he pivoted back the Philippines to the US. So there's that tiny chance that could happen to Sara Duterte, but that's very tiny.
Yeah, I don't think so, because she did not have the exposure to the West as Bongbong Marcos had. Bongbong studied in Wharton, but he never got his degree. And he lived in UK. They were exiled in US. It was like a love-hate relationship, but ultimately he was really, his heart was in the West, with the West.
Well, there's a lot of discussion now with U.S. policy towards Southeast Asia, generally with the tariffs and the pressure to increase defense spending and do less business with China. How's this being received in the Philippines, especially now we're a couple of days after the great deal between Marcos and Trump, where Philippine tariffs are reduced all the way from 20 to 19% on their exports to the U.S., and Philippine market is supposedly opened, although we have no details. What's the reaction so far in the Philippines, and how might this play out politically going forward?
Yeah, the initial reaction right after Trump posted on his social media platform about what the deal was, saying that the Philippines was a tough negotiator. They're now going to have a 19% tariff down from 20%. So, well, the view is divided here in social media. Others who are not pro-Duterte are saying that, it could be a good deal because we're getting commitments for the defense of the Philippines to build the deterrence capacity of the Philippine military. So it's like a whole package. and that there are opportunities because there will be zero tariffs for products from the US like soy, wheat, things like that. But we still need to get the big picture.
I think it will have because the Marcos, while in the most recent survey, I think his trust rating went a bit up, right, Marites? But generally, Sara Duterte enjoys more trust and favorability. So I think that will definitely have an impact in the way he's perceived locally, especially if that could be used by his opponents, that you faced Trump and then that's all you got. And then you weren't able to do anything about the immigration crackdown against Filipinos, especially with the recent news about the Filipino workers working in the cruise ship. So there's still no news about that. So all these things, I think, are working against Marcos's favor.
I just want to point out that the Duterte social media machinery is so good, so effective, that I'm wondering why Marcos, who was able to use this effectively to embellish or to project his father's legacy as one of the golden age, etc., is not able to use this same machinery. So anyway, in social media, it's really, really the social media machinery for the Dutertes are always on high gear.
So you talked about Sara Duterte's public image as being one of high trust. And is that all simply because she has great social media? I mean, one of the things, of course, that we experience in the United States, and I've certainly seen here in the Philippines, especially being down in Davao City where I am right now, is that people really do live in very different media universes. So if I'm in Manila, then I almost feel like I'm in the Manila bubble, right? Everybody kind of thinks the same way, especially when you go to the embassy cocktail parties or in and amongst the elites. There's a certain view of Rodrigo Duterte, and then you get out into a place like I'm in now, and it's a completely different view. I was at the barber the other day, and the barber was like, "Well, yeah, I mean, of course, everybody knows that Bongbong Marcos is a drug addict, and that his wife's friend was killed in Beverly Hills, and there's suspicion around that, and so all of these things that are not talked about at all in the Manila bubble are talked about quite a bit outside of it."
Yeah, it's very true. Like I remember being shocked at this phenomenon when I covered the 2022 elections. It's like there are two sets of the Philippines which have two different facts and history. So we're seeing that continuity now. And I think we can say that the social media operations of Sara Duterte are really great, and have really boosted her trust ratings, as well as the favorability of the family, despite the ICC arrest of Duterte. But I would also say it's really the Duterte brand. It's really hard to explain it, but you know this in Davao, and that has translated to other areas in the Philippines, wherein you would say that the Duterte brand can withstand whatever controversy, especially with the ICC and all. So it's just the social media, I think it has laid the foundation for this Duterte brand to last for decades more, if you know what I mean. Because this has started 2014, 2015, and we all see how strong it is despite all these attacks against them. So yeah, it's a combination of a good brand, a highly sellable brand, and then social media. But I think it's really the brand itself.
Ray, I was surprised when I met some government employees, and they said, they do field work, they travel around the Philippines, and they said that people they talk to, and even these government employees themselves, they find Sara charismatic. So I think Camille experienced that when she covered the 2022 campaign. So I don't know where that charisma is coming from, but she is charismatic.
And that's really true. I closely covered the Sara Duterte and Marcos campaign. And I would say that it's also because of the context of the Filipino electorate, we're really drawn to personalities, and they have mastered it because they came from local politicians. It's really, you get to really know each voter in your locality. So I saw that during the national campaign of Sara Duterte. There's really that personal touch, and again, that charm, and again, that authenticity that has been working for her today.
Before Jim jumps in here, let me just ask a quick follow-up. Is Sara Duterte going to be impeached? Because that was a thing just a minute ago, and it seems like it's not a thing now. Is that this was in regard to some of her financial dealings as vice president, having to do with something called confidential funds and a few other things, and then what was being called a death threat against the president, right?
Yeah, as Sara Duterte was impeached by the lower house, by Congress. What we are awaiting now is the impeachment trial in the Senate, which is supposed to start August 4. That's next month. However, there is a case pending before the Philippine Supreme Court questioning if the impeachment complaint is constitutional, because here in the Philippines, the House is only allowed to file one impeachment complaint a year. And it so happened that there were 3 impeachment complaints submitted to Congress, but only one was filed. Only one was accepted. So there's that debate, and we'll see how the Supreme Court decides this. And then if they decide that it's constitutional, then the impeachment trial starts first week of August. And as you say, Ray, that if the impeachment trial continues, it will be a game changer if all the evidence comes out. Because during an impeachment trial, bank secrecy is waived. The Anti-Money Laundering Council can release bank records, as what happened during the impeachment of our Chief Justice many years ago. So that will be a game changer if all the evidence is presented and the public sees the alleged fraud and corruption.
All right, Jim, over to you for our exit question.
Okay. Well, the last question really is Duterte's legacy is in question as well, because as you mentioned, he's in The Hague right now in jail, facing charges before the International Criminal Court of Justice for his war on drugs, where you mentioned thousands of people were killed. Does that, as we discussed his daughter's campaign, it seems like that has no bearing on whether she's going to be successful or not.
The arrest of Duterte drew sympathy, much more sympathy for the old man as well as for his daughter Sara, who has been traveling and speaking to various overseas Filipino workers in Australia, Malaysia. She's like internationalizing the issue to ask the overseas workers to pressure their host governments to support her father. But, no government has supported Duterte in this case. It's just that I think she's gathering support from just Filipino overseas workers.
Yeah, but if anything, it just increased the chances of Sara Duterte winning the presidency. It's sad, but that's the reality.
It actually sounds extremely familiar from the United States perspective. I think we experienced a very similar phenomenon. So, all right. Well, this has been fantastic. Marites, Vitug, Camille, Elemia. I got it right this time, I think. Very good. Thank you so much. Definitely want to recommend your book. Everyone should go out and buy. Where can they get it, and where can they follow you?
Well, Camille, you know where. Can you announce it?
For international, for those outside the Philippines, you can get it on Amazon. We have an ebook on Amazon. So just search for Unrequited Love, Duterte's China Embrace. But for the hard copy of the books, you can email Ateneo University Press. For those in the Philippines, it's available on the official shops of the Ateneo Press on Lazada and Shopee. These are our own versions of Amazon. And for those in Singapore, it's available at the National University of Singapore Library, Book Press.
All right, and then where can they keep track of your own work? You have social media. Where should they follow you?
I'm a one social media platform person, so I'm only on Facebook. Camille has more access to social media.
Yeah, you can follow me on Facebook, LinkedIn, and
Instagram.
no, Instagram is for anything. Related, it's LinkedIn, Facebook, and X.
Because Camille set me up on Instagram, but I don't use it anyway. Anyway,
You know, speaking from Gen X, I get it. You know, I've got Jim. I have to kind of drag him across these things. You know, Jim is still out there with, he's got the paper newspaper that he reads every morning. And
You can't trust what's on the electrons.
it's,
how about X? Camille, are you on X, right?
Yeah, I'm on X. And I think you are too.
Yeah, and inactive.
so all those times that I tag you on X, that does no good whatsoever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again, Camille and Marites. I hope to see you soon. And of course, our sponsor for Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific is Bauer Group Asia, a strategic advisory firm that specializes in the Indo-Pacific. Bauer Group applies unmatched expertise and experience to help clients navigate the world's most complex and dynamic markets. My co-host, Jim Carouso, is a senior advisor with Bauer Group, and you can visit their website at bauergroupasia.com. So, Jim, as I said, you know, it's interesting timing to have this discussion because I am actually in Davao City. And just driving around the city, you still see Rodrigo Duterte's picture everywhere, and they're not all just old campaign photos, although there's some of those. I mean, he's actually been, even though he is in custody in The Hague awaiting trial, he was reelected, or was elected mayor, which of course he was for years and years before he was president. He was elected mayor, and so he is technically right now the mayor of the city, although he is not even in the country and not even free to, he's not even out of custody. So that's how powerful the name Duterte is down here.
Well, I remember a congressman who ran on the platform, often tried, never convicted. So I think...
I think that, even, just based on our discussion and what I know of how things are, if he's convicted, his popularity may go up. Now, I'm not sure if he ends up sort of in prison, whether or not he'll stay as mayor for his entire term and things will just be run by, his administration. I don't know, but it is a remarkable situation.
What still gets me is he was clearly pro-China in a country that's anti-China. He was anti-American in a country that's famously pro-American. The military didn't like him. The establishment didn't like him. And yet, here we are. Explain
there
that.
We are. Well, I really do think, it does have a lot. Whenever I'm in Manila, I'm reminded of the Manila bubble, and it really is something we know about very well in the United States is there is a sense that there are these elites who are out of touch with the nation or at least vast swaths of the nation. And, I think that feeling is even more accentuated in the Philippines. I mean, I've had people who are pro-Duterte say to me, the Philippines has been run by the same 5 families forever before Rodrigo Duterte arrived. Now, maybe he just makes it 6 families, but he certainly came from outside of that, if you want to call it an oligarchy or just a collection of elites who have all the money and all the power. And, so there's been this sense that that's been the situation here in the Philippines for a long time. And Rodrigo Duterte was here to crash the gates.
Well, I'll tell you, I just came back from a week in northern Wisconsin. And the biggest city there, I think, has, 25 people or something. And they feel very much the same, that the coastal elites ignored them or mocked them. And so they like Donald Trump because they feel, at a minimum, he tears down those elites. Yeah.
I of course, I live in, around Silicon Valley, coastal elites. You're over there in, near, the coastal elites in New York City, although I imagine things are a bit different upstate. So yeah, I mean, I think there's been very much in our own country, a city mouse, country mouse kind of thing. And, So I think there's just a very, very similar phenomenon here in the Philippines. And they talked about social media. You know, the Philippines loves social media. It is a very, very social media country. That everybody is on Facebook, everybody is on TikTok and YouTube. It is just that's the country. And so the TV stations, you know, sometimes I'll go on TV stations talking about the West Philippine Sea. It occurs to me in the back of my mind that the only way a lot of people will ever see those clips are if they're forwarded to them on social media, because they're just not watching.
Well, you are highly Instagrammable.
I guess I'll have to get myself an account.
All right. On that note, you have a story that relates to our guests?
Yes, we were talking about how the military here in the Philippines was once prone to coup d'etat. And so I was here for, as I mentioned during the conversation, 6 of them. And so this was during the term of Corazon Aquino, who came right after, of course, the first Ferdinand Marcos, who was, of course, ousted in the People Power Revolution in 1986. And so while I was stationed at Clark Air Base, there were 6 of these coups against Cory. And during one of them, we were getting ready for my friend's wedding. And I was in the wedding party. I was going to be a groomsman for this wedding. And the wedding was going to take place in the chapel on Clark Air Base. My friend lived, and his bride-to-be lived off base in private housing. And so they both were coming from their houses, and they both had family who had flown in for the wedding. So, so he was coming from his place with his family. She was coming from her place with her family, and we were in the middle of a coup, and they closed the gates to the base. And so they had to go out and get special permission to be able to bring all of these people on base. And this was just for the rehearsal. And of course, nobody knew the wedding was going to be the next day. Nobody knew what tomorrow would bring. Because it was a coup d'etat. Who knew who would be in charge? Who knew what the situation would be? Who knew what decisions the Philippine military who were on base with us would make? So as we finish up the rehearsal, they go into a meeting with the chaplain, and they come out having already signed their wedding contract. And Jerry's got his arm around Michelle, and he says, well, we decided that this is war. And we have to make wartime contingency decisions. And so we've already signed the contract. We're not going to tell anybody except for you people, here in the wedding party. You're the only people who know. If we have a wedding tomorrow, great. If we don't, at least we're legal. At least we've signed the contract. So that's my coup d'etat story.
Well, in the middle of a coup, you really want everything to be legal.
So yes, and the things got so interesting during that particular coup that in order to aid the Aquino administration against the coup, against the rebels, the U.S. flew our F-4 fighter jets over Manila to kind of encourage everybody to stay where they were, so encourage the rebels not to come out and fight. The one thing that the F-4 was good for, F-4s, of course, all been retired from the U.S. military long since, but one thing they were good for was they were extremely loud. And so if you wanted to encourage them to stay inside, setting an F-4 over at supersonic speeds is one way to do it.
Well, they can't hear each other. It's great.
Well, one guy who's not extremely loud is our producer, Ian. By the way, we've had requests come in. People want to hear from Ian. We will plan a time in the future where we talk to Ian a little bit about what he does, and we keep telling you about these amazing graphics that he does and all the attention that they get. If you want to see those, you should follow him at his X account at Ian Ellis Jones. But we will have him on sometime in the near future, and he'll talk about that a little bit. If you like this episode, please subscribe and follow. You can also see us on YouTube if you're not already there. That's youtube.com @IP Podcast. If you're watching us and want to listen to us on your podcast feed, of course, we're on all of them, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of those. And of course, we're all over social media. The ones that we have are X and LinkedIn and Blue Sky. You can also go back and listen to some of our other podcasts. Just last week, we had a very special podcast that I did with the Secretary of Defense of the Philippines, Gilberto Teodoro, which I did there in his office there at Camp Aguinaldo. That was a fascinating interview, and you should definitely go and listen to that if you have the chance. And finally, of course, you can email us. We are emailable at IndoPacificPodcast@gmail.com. That's IndoPacificPodcast@gmail.com. By the way, that is where some of our best suggestions come in, and we do read all of those. And finally, of course, please visit our sponsor, BauerGroupAsia.com. That's BauerGroupAsia.com. And if you do decide to hire Bauer Group, make sure you tell them that you heard it from us first. For this time, until next time, for Jim and Ian, I'm Ray. Thanks for joining us on Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific.